Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming back to us on the Ben Stewart Podcast. And I just have to say that this episode is going to be very, very special for me. It is a very near and dear friend of mine. I would consider him family in the deepest regard. We've known each other since 2008, I believe it was. We came together in Toronto for my very first public talk. It was right after I put out Esoteric Agenda. You would know him if you followed the films that I've put out because he was the main subject in the first film I ever did on any subject, which was Rob in the Pagé family. The film was called Ungrip. And since then, I won't get into the litany of it now, but quite a journey with this individual, not just with he and I together and what's happened in the world, but something very beautiful is going to come out of this conversation. And now, it's the Nehuin, who basically that is what they call themselves. The other name for them would be the Cree. And I've spoken about the Cree in the past on Waking Infinity News. Awarded him, it was the clan mother and the elder that awarded him the name White Walking Feather and awarded him with an eagle feather. And I'll let him explain this, but let's just get right into it. This is very near and dear to my heart. I'm very excited to have them all on, so I'm very happy for you all to get to meet my very dear friend on the Ben Stewart Podcast. And here we are. My good friend, Rob. I still sometimes notice that I call you Rob, and it's really beautiful that you've been gifted the name White Walking Feather, and I really would like the audience to understand how was it that name came about, and then we'll dive back deeper into some of the backstory there. But I would love to hear that story once more.
Well, actually, it was. Well, thank you first off for having me on your podcast, Ben. It was actually because of Ungrip. A fellow by the name of Sweetgrass Sitting Bear saw me in the film and realized that I was just a few hours away from him, so he reached out and befriended me, and we've been friends ever since. And we spent many times in sweat ceremonies and other ceremonies and talking, and we held camps at our place, and we attended camps in Saskatchewan helping indigenous youth and trying to help bridge the gap and reconcile a relationship that's been strained for hundreds of years. And I have a profound respect and love for Sweetgrass Sitting Bear. And he invited me to the ceremony. And, you know, it started at midnight. I'm not going to talk about the ceremony because it's sacred, but it was within that ceremony that the clan mother and the elder gave me the white eagle feather and the spirit name White Walking Feather. And it was Sweetgrass Sitting Bear that helped explain that, you know, this is a high honor, and receiving an eagle feather is much like receiving a gift from a very high-end diplomat. And so I carry that white eagle feather and that spirit name with the intent of continuing to foster a level of reconciliation and to decolonize not only my way of thinking and behaving and interacting, but also to challenge others to do the same. And so that's that all came about because of the film Ungrip. And yeah, it's been a interesting story since then.
It definitely has. You know, when you speak about the colonization, I think even a word like that kind of falls short on people. And uh, I appreciate the fact that there are these efforts, not just from those from from our tribes, but from the Native American tribes, who can also see that there needs to be some connection here, that we really do need to start connecting quite a bit more. But even before that, connecting with the others, the people in the world that we would consider to be parts of other tribes. Um, what I really love about your story, maybe we can start, bringing it back to where you were right before you decided to move off the grid, where then you began actually, let's just throw out one detail, is having treaties or agreements with, maybe treaties the wrong word, agreements with even the wildlife and the coyotes around your area. Going from the way you were living before to that, I would love to hear that transition.
Okay, well,
It's a big one, I know.
that's a loaded one. Okay, so the colonized way of life. I, lived in the city and purchased my food from the store, and when I flipped on the switch, electricity came from the grid and all that kind of stuff. But what that meant was that I was completely dependent on corporations and government agencies to provide all of these things. And when I went through my healing journey, as I shared in Ungrip, I realized that this relationship I had with the state was a violent and abusive one. And for me to set boundaries required that I challenge myself on not condoning or participating in that type of relationship. So that meant that I had to learn how to live on the land and build a relationship with the land. And, as the elder said in the ceremony when I got my spirit name, he told me, we are the land. And that really hit me. It really got me to change how I relate with my relationships with not only the coyotes, but the chickens, the trees, the birds, the worms, the water, the air, the land itself. And much like I talk about now, I held 2 decolonization ceremonies here with my tribe here this summer, and I tell people that the trees and the eagles and the bears and the moose and the deer, they're all a part of my tribe as well too. It's not a tribe of just people, but every spiritual being on this planet is a part of my tribe, and I have a profound connection and relationship with each and every one of them because I'm not separated from it. I'm a part of it, and to separate myself from it would diminish that relationship. And I then also have to acknowledge that any claim of ownership over the land would put not only them into involuntary slavery, but myself. And so this whole paradigm shift on how I relate to the land and all of my cousins, which is terminology that the Nehuan and others have been talking about for generations. It's just now I'm starting to comprehend what in the world they were talking about. And that changes how I relate to and interact with them all. And so part of this now is to acknowledge that I am just as much a part of the land as any of them. And that makes it even more important for me to acknowledge that and to help protect and bring prosperity and replenish the land, as I believe we were asked to do.
Were you, because I know that, because I know your story so much, I want to make sure I'm not skipping over an obvious part for the audience to understand, but the process of basically letting go some of the old connections that you had. What did you have to discover about contracts and agreements in order to understand that you had then the sole desire to give up some of your contracts? And just for the audience to understand, when we did the film Ungrip, the whole story is laid out there where he basically didn't just tear up all of his agreements, like his driver's license, any, permits, licenses, agreements, things along those lines. There was a process of sending letters back to the proper authorities that, let's say, were at the top of those governance chains or those chains of jurisdiction. So maybe you can bring us a little bit through the story of what you had to psychologically and emotionally and spiritually relinquish, and then how you had to do it physically to show the greater community, and especially these channels of control, that you were no longer serving them as a master.
Well, I'm going to refer to the medicine wheel because this is an image that many indigenous cultures around the world use to acknowledge that, we are a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual being. And in my view, through my healing, I acknowledge that I'm actually a spiritual being having a physical experience. And so part of the challenge of being here is, how do I bring all four of these aspects together in balance? And so for me, the first step was to acknowledge who I am. And a big part of that came through the healing journey that I went through back in 2001. In my view, that was important because even what I see unfolding today, it's critical that we know who we are, because if we don't have a sense of self, then it makes it easy to fall for the brainwashing and manipulation and control that's taking place. So that was, in my view, the key. And the next step was then to put the authorities on notice that I'm no longer going to be a subject to their feudal system. And, when Ungrip came out, I didn't know about feudalism, but since then, when I researched feudalism and compared it to the relationship that I was in, it was like spot on, bang on. And ironically, the process that I went through was correct, because I was following Spirit's guidance through this. And so, the letters that I sent were essentially to let them know that I refuse to provide them service. And I'm using feudal terms here now. So, without getting into a big long class on feudalism, I also, inform them that I declare peace and establish my own law form, so that I can then govern myself and establish my relationship with Mother Earth and the Creator, rather than them. But that also required that I go through and remove all of my dependencies, every single one, because every dependency that I have on them is a feudal tenure or a contract, and is subject then to the feudal terms and conditions of their empire. And that was a tough adjustment, because that required that I take 100% responsibility and accountability for my life. And, that meant, getting off the grid. And, most people think, well, getting off grid, you need solar panels, but that's just such a small part of it. It's not just electricity. It's, taking a look at food sovereignty, water sovereignty, energy sovereignty, waste sovereignty, shelter sovereignty, and even our own personal sovereignty. The implications of being responsible for growing my own food, collecting my own water, treating my own waste, You know, building my own shelters, all that kind of stuff can be intimidating. But to me, it's imperative, especially now that, you know, people are being confronted with losing their jobs, supply chain failures, all that kind of stuff. You know, to me, I've been encouraging people to explore these options because I saw a lot of this stuff coming. And, you know, that then required a huge emotional and mental mourning and grieving process as well too, because I had to say goodbye to being on the teat of the state and you know, the support structures and the safety nets and all that kind of stuff, and instead take 100% responsibility and accountability for my life. And that's a daunting challenge, but in my view was something that I felt was necessary in order for me to have a healthy relationship with Mother Earth and myself, in being in service to Creator instead of being in service to the state. And so from a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspect, I had to address that relationship on all four of those areas. It's not just solar panels and greenhouses kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to address one thing. Do you have YouTube open, Rob?
I don't know.
You don't? Okay. So the echo is probably coming from somewhere else.
Okay.
And for everyone who, there's somebody in the chat who said, could we do anything about the audio level? We're attempting to work on that right now. It's really just, there's a hum that's going on. So let me explain a little bit. Basically, we're doing this from, I mean, Gordo and I are doing this here with good internet. We're talking to White Walking Feather, who is living pretty remote right now on the east coast of Canada. And so the way that he has to do it without high-speed internet, he's doing it off of a cell phone and a cell booster. It's not ideal circumstances, but there's something about it that, at least for me, I love the simplicity of it. We're going to do our best to take care of that one frequency that you're hearing in the audio. But we also have, Francis Ignatius, who just said, I'm super impressed with his abilities and courage in himself that he had to make that change. And this is really what we're talking about in life, is we all have so much agency to make real meaningful change in our life. And when it comes down to it, I think a lot of the grief and a lot of the shame and guilt that we hold sometimes is knowing that we did have agency and opportunity to step deeper into our own empowerment, to step deeper into our own healing, that we did have the time and we did have the agency, but we didn't take those windows of opportunity. And I noticed, just as a filmmaker, I noticed this. I'm always scared of the next project that I'm about to take, but that's because when something bigger is offered to me, I don't say no to it, especially if I know it's on my path and there's a great deal I'll learn from it. And that's really exactly what we're getting here. Basically, to say yes to the opportunities, Rob, I would love to go a little bit deeper with this. The opportunities that you had to heal came from, what were the core tenets around that? I mean, for one, I just want to go back and say that I love the fact that you created your own legal system, your own law system, I should say, difference, and that you actually communicated to and attempted to communicate with those who assumed the responsibility that you were relinquishing. I think that has to set you apart from anybody that I've ever met that's gone into learning about maritime admiralty law or our relationship to the state or to any system of control. I think what's beautiful about it is the understanding that we're only dealing with other human beings as well. And you brought a level of humility that I thought was so important all the way into the courtrooms as well. Actually, that's the question I want to ask you is, what was it that caused you to realize that's the way? When you got called into court to explain why you didn't have it was a driver's license and a license plate or registration tags, why you went in there and spoke to them as equal human beings. It seems like that doesn't seem to dawn on that many people who take this path that you've gone on. So maybe share with us a little bit about like the journey your heart had to go on throughout all of this, discovering who you are and relinquishing the ties to false authority and control.
Well, I'm going to kind of correct you there a little bit, because it wasn't a law form that I created. It was one that I connected with that trumps all the law forms here on the earth. And that law form is the law of love. And so when I, years ago, when I was exploring all of this stuff, I was watching other people and they're struggling with, going to jail and, huge fines and all that kind of stuff. And it just wasn't resonating. And I thought, there has to be a simpler, easier way. I believe the solution is simple, because complexity kind of makes it so that only certain people can deconstruct it and navigate through it. But how can somebody navigate through this no matter who they are? And so I was looking for the solution is simple. And so for me, I realized that the law of love is the law of spirit. And that comes back to why it was important for me to acknowledge that I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience. And so, I started asking myself questions. Well, what law forms do spirit go by? And, acknowledging that a lot of the law forms here are man-made. And so what law forms are spirit-made by Creator? And, it's like Christ said, the two highest commandments, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And to me, this feudal system is a system of war, and if I'm to love myself and love my neighbor, then I had to find a peaceful way of navigating this, and their system was not peaceful, and any participation in that system would be me using the war machine against my neighbors, and that's not love. Because in the end, I watched people sue people and file liens and all that kind of stuff, and those are all actions of war, because you need the system in order for enforcement, and the system has a monopoly on force and coercion. So that didn't resonate with me at all. So I had to find a different way, and that's when I started asking questions about how can we navigate these relationships in a peaceful way. And I know it's uncomfortable, but for me, there's a passage in scripture that says, agree with thine adversary quickly, lest you be dragged before a court and thrown into jail. And so I acknowledge that, if I agree with somebody who's making a claim against me, then there's no dispute, and therefore there's no reason to go to court, because courts are there to resolve disputes. And so that's the approach I've been taking for years, is to agree with my adversary. And it seems counterintuitive, but even the system, for somebody that's making a claim, the burden of proof is on them. And so I agree with them, and then I get to choose the burden of proof. And because I've studied the system in great detail, I know what they can and cannot do, and so I challenge them to prove that they approve some things, and 99 times out of 100, they can't prove it because they violated their own statutes and regulations, or as such, and I've helped people with child protective services. I've dealt with debts, all kinds of stuff using this approach, and it doesn't seem like it works, but I've found great success in it because I'm agreeing with people and I'm not causing disputes. I'm not trying to cause a war, but instead I stand as a witness to testify to their violence and abuse and get them to prove that they're not, and they can't. So that's kind of the approach I've been taking.
Wow. So I remember with there was one story that I would like to maybe touch upon a little bit. It was the one time that you were called into, I think, and I'm not remembering if it's the bailiff or who it was that you met immediately upon entering the courtroom, and they asked you to sign your name, or maybe before to sign your name, this gentleman asked you, "Are you this name, Robert Page?" and pointed at that name. And most people at that point probably wouldn't realize that it's begun yet. Had you seen that before, or were you just well versed enough to know that anyone inside that building who asks you your name, you're probably just ready for it to give your response? But I would really like the audience to understand that aspect of it, because it's probably something that if somebody wanted to just have a cursory understanding of this and then go into a courtroom and argue their case as being the old way of saying it was natural person or sovereign being, could you explain that moment right there, and how that was even a curious or very rare moment, if it had ever happened before to that bailiff? Could you explain that story?
Well, I kind of hesitate to, because I think things have changed since then, because that was back in 2008, and I think the courts have changed a lot since then, but
Makes you say that.
I haven't been in court since then. So, because my whole approach has been to avoid court at all costs, because court is a battlefield, and I declare peace, so I don't want to be on the battlefield. I believe that story was in Ungripped, where I shared how the Crown prosecutor pointed to the ticket and asked me if that was me, and I said, "No, that's not me." And he then suggested that I would have to identify myself, and I smiled at him and agreed. But at that point, they proceeded to empty out the courtroom, and then he took a bathroom break, but it was like half an hour, and I suspect he was in the back talking to the judge. And when he came back, they called the case, and the judge dismissed all the charges due to a lack of evidence. But she also said that this is not a precedent-setting case. And, I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that was a very important thing to acknowledge, that it wasn't a precedent-setting case. And this has to do with me agreeing to be, the person, instead of standing as a spiritual being. And this again has huge feudal implications, and without getting into a whole deconstruction of the feudal system, I think it's more important to deconstruct feudalism and really comprehend the scope of our relationship with the state from a feudal point of view, so that when people start to deconstruct their relationship with the crown, the crown corporations, and that sort of thing, it becomes way clearer on what that relationship looks like, how it works. Because a feudal serf owes service to their feudal lord, and so there's a reason why it's called Service Canada or Service Ontario or Service Alberta. It's not there because the government is providing service to the people. It's there because the people owe service to the crown, and they're there to manage all of the service that people owe. And the whole relationship kind of gets flipped on its back when we see it for what it actually is, which also means that there's a huge amount of anger to deal with, because when I first learned this, I was angry for 6 months because I was raised to believe that the government is to look after me and help protect me and all that kind of stuff, but that's not true. It's not even close to being true. The ministers don't minister to the people. They minister to the governor general, and the governor general ministers to the queen. And, there's corporate structures and corporation souls and all that kind of stuff to, it's all in there. But in the end, I don't really need to interact with all of that if I know who I am, and I can just walk away from it. And that's what I've been working hard to teach people and explain over the last 16 years now, I guess.
Yeah, it has been a while. There's a couple points I want to come back to. One is you said you believe the legal system, if I'm getting the words correctly, the legal system has changed since 2008, since we made, well, I guess the interview was probably 2010 when you said that, and then film came out 2011 or something along those lines. But you said you think the legal system has changed, and I'd love to chat about that, because there are a lot of people who are still engaging with this system, and I would really love for the audience to understand a little bit better, like, how do they better understand the relationship between them and the system? Because the way you just explained it, it sounds like we have this idea that government is of the people, for the people, by the people. It's this story that we're still hooked on. I want to know from your perspective, is that now, has that ever been the case? And I know there's a certain element to, like, regardless of what other people's intentions are for us, there's an element of ourself that we must claim. But I'm curious, because the way you were mentioning that we give service to the state, and we give service to the members there, it feels like a harvest rather than it's here to serve us. It's here harvesting us. And I would, so I know there's two parts to that question. One, I'm really curious what maybe specifically changed in law or in the legal system since that conversation we had. And then also, how can people start engaging with at least understanding the relationship that you're laying out for them here, the feudal system?
First off, let's clarify a few things first. Here in Canada, it's feudalism and always has been. In the U.S., after your Declaration of Independence and your Constitution, you guys were all sovereigns, and then in late 1800s, that all changed and it turned into feudalism. There's other jurisdictions around the world that operate using feudal principles. The technicalities and logistics of it may differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in essence, it's all, in my view, the same now. How the legal system has changed is, technically the rules haven't changed that much, but their aggression and violence and abuse has drastically escalated. And so that, for me, that's even more reason not to participate in that system. I can't remember your other question. Sorry. Does that answer your question?
Well, I mean, what is it that listeners that are hearing about this, what would be a suggestion as far as a way forward, because everyone now is seeing what's happening in the world. Everyone now is questioning things deeper. I think that Gordo and I right beforehand were talking about who was just on Dr. McCullough and Malone, I guess, or maybe it was just McCullough on Joe Rogan. These things are becoming mainstream, and people are really looking for answers. And I think if I'm gauging what most people are feeling right now is uprooted from a concept of how they were held by a system, and being uprooted in that way, what would you suggest people engage with what's going on in the world right now, especially towards the biggest aggressors, the institutions that are the biggest aggressors right now? What do you suggest for people?
That's $1 million question, right? What do people do? And for me, I can't tell people what to do. I can tell you what I've done. And what I've done is I've acknowledged their abuse and violence. And so I've taken steps to remove my dependency on them, because I also knew that we would get to a point where, you know, their behavior would escalate. And so we're seeing that escalation now, and have been over the last 2 years. I know there's lots of people that are acknowledging that, you know, some people are, you know, going to jail, and, you know, the truth of what's happening is, you know, starting to come out, and, you know, that will start tearing down some of this. But I see this as World War III, and we've just begun. And I also see supply chain failures, financial challenges, economic challenges, and this wickedness, you know, going through its death throes, but, you know, doing what it can to install their one world government sooner rather than later. And in order to navigate this, I still believe that people need to return to Mother Earth and learn how to, you know, establish their food sovereignty and water sovereignty and shelter sovereignty and personal sovereignty and all that kind of stuff, because there's going to be a point where, you know, these dominoes are going to start falling, and the disruptions are going to be very, very challenging. And that also then connects with emotional health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and having a balance of all four in order to navigate this in a healthy way. And I also believe that part of this is to acknowledge that what we're witnessing is kind of the collapse of the old guard, and what do we replace it with? And I'm witnessing now divine feminine stepping up and starting to create and build, reestablishing tribes, and doing that in a very beautiful, loving way, because you know, we're helping to provide an environment for that to start unfolding. And so while we see all of this collapse and crumbling, there's also a lot of people doing some very beautiful work to build the bridge to help people navigate this and come over and reconnect with our mother, to replenish the earth, to heal, to build meaningful relationships, and to decolonize our way of thinking, decolonize our way of behaving, decolonize our way of interacting and seeing our relationships in the world and with each other and even with ourselves. That decolonization process and that healing process is going to take time. And, you know, I've often argued that, you know, yeah, it's one thing to rebel against the system and replace it or want to fix it, but the root, what are the root causes? And in my view, the root cause is our disconnect from Mother Earth, our disconnect from ourselves, our disconnect from spirit. And when we start to heal that and reconnect, then we can then acknowledge that we actually don't need all of these systems anymore. Our relationships fundamentally change, and we don't, go after material wealth or that kind of stuff, because that there's really there's no wealth there. The wealth comes in doing the work and establishing meaningful relationships with other people and with our environment and with the water and the sky and the other nations that walk this path the way the Nehu and others have been trying to describe to us. And that's part of that decolonization process. And that's what I feel we need to embrace. And the Divine Feminine is taking a lead role in that. And she should be taking a lead role in that, because she is a creative force, a creative power. She is more connected to spirit because she's the portal between the spiritual and this physical realm. And it's my responsibility to protect her and to provide a safe container for her to be able to do that work. And that's what I'm looking at focusing on, is to help people navigate that process to decolonize, so that they can then embrace that way of thinking, so we can nurture that and build something that can then catch a whole bunch of people that are going to fall, because when things collapse, there's going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of hurt people, and we need to catch as many as we can.
The Divine Feminine, and especially like understanding the connection with the earth. I want to understand a little bit better, what is it that you have been doing to address what's coming up emotionally? Because I feel like what's going to happen when these dominoes, and I believe this decade is the decade, that's just my personal belief, between 2020 to 2030, there's going to be more change than most people have ever experienced in their lives, probably anyone alive. What is it that you're doing to address some of these things in you and also around you? Because I think this might even be something called, I call, for me, the best practices in understanding that waking up isn't simply a beautiful and clean process. I think there are some best practices that you've gone through, you've pioneered, and you've gone through the difficult way that many people who are only waking up now, quite a bit a while after you've done this work. What does that look like? I know you haven't done it while people in mass are experiencing this, but it seems like now there are more and more people coming to this crisis and awakening point. And they are, I feel like a lot of people are pointing fingers because they're looking for a way to externalize some of the guilt or the shame or the panic that they're feeling, because they don't know how to hold that charge. So help bring us into what you think that actually looks like, dealing with the unintended and sometimes not so pretty and very messy processes of awakening that I think a lot of people are going to voluntarily or involuntarily go through right now.
Well, first off, I want to acknowledge the Red Tribes here, because and particularly Sweetgrass Sitting Bear, because when he went to a conference back down in New Zealand, he came back and he shared with me, like, I was surprised, Rob, like there was white people there, and I was surprised too. And then he told me, yeah, there's actually the Sami people in the northern part of Europe and into Russia that still practice their traditional tribal way of life. And that's when I realized that, my ancestors were colonized, 1,000+ years ago. But prior to that, they lived a tribal way of life too. And so, if I connect with my ancestors, I can then reconnect with their way of life and their ceremonies and traditions and medicines and that sort of thing in order to help this process. But I also had to acknowledge that we're going through a process right now that we've never done before, and that process is decolonization. So we needed new ceremonies to be able to decolonize because we've never done this before. We've gone through colonization, but I don't think anybody's gone through decolonization before. So I meditated, and we created here a decolonization ceremony, and we invited people up twice, once in the summer and once in the fall, for a whole week. And the first day we sat in circle, and the day was focused on emotional intimacy. And we did that by working on shadows, and I kind of cracked people open by sharing my story and my stories of recovery from depression and suicide attempts and addictions and all that kind of stuff, and how I used to be abusive, and all the challenges associated with that, and just to help people feel safe to share their shadows. And by the end of the day, when we do that in a safe way, people feel safe to be able to share in a vulnerable way, which then builds emotional intimacy. And then, the next day we then worked on some tribal ceremonies. And we also worked on exploring the feminine and the masculine, and how that interaction works in a healthier way rather than the colonial way. And we challenge people in their colonial constructs so that we can then explore what these relationships are. And us masculine, we got together, and we held our own circle, we had our own discussions, but we also then set up a safe space to welcome the divine feminine, and they show up, and what, it was one of the most absolutely beautiful gifts I've ever received, is seeing women feel so safe that they were literally flowing and dancing and excited, and it had a profound impact not only on the women that were joining the circle, but also us men. So part of this decolonization process is to challenge our relationships with ourselves and each other. We start off with inside ourselves, and then we move to between men and women, and then into the tribe, so that we're covering, through that process, the emotional, mental, and physical and spiritual. And it's only until like the fourth day that I actually start talking about our relationship with the state, to help people connect with what that relationship looks like. And it took 3 days to prepare people for that, because in my view, we need to connect with who we are first before we can actually see what these other relationships look like. And that's why I think Spirit asked me to do this ceremony in this way, is to be able to help people navigate that. And so when we got to the fourth day, it was a purely intellectual exercise. But when I then explained feudalism after doing all that work, people got it right away. Like, it was so plain to see the difference between peace and war, the difference between, standing in your own personal medicine wheel, acknowledging that, I am that I am, that Christ level of consciousness, that ability to have that relationship in physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and to set boundaries, and to acknowledge the level of intimacy and vulnerability in that, so that when we then evaluate these other relationships, the abuse and violence become very, very clear. And then at the end of the ceremony, we spend some time preparing people so that when they go back to their home fire, they can navigate reintegrating back into their way of life, and finding ways then to take what they learned and integrate that and start making changes in their life. Whether they're holding their own circles now, or starting to grow gardens, or, going out in nature and learning how to wild forage for food, or learn medicines, or, whatever it is, it's up to them. But, I'm one man, and so the intent with these ceremonies is to train people how to do this, so that they can then move forward and help others do the same. And so that's part of that journey that I've gone through, with the help of my tribe here, to hold space for that to start unfolding.
It's surprising how deep. I mean, man, we've known one another for a while. I love how I'm surprised when I hear it in different settings. But these ceremonies, as much as I've heard you mention them before, it finally came online for me and clicked in a way that. So I've done smaller ceremonies with those of the Lakota, and the more I learned about what happened with the Lakota, basically, just a real quick rundown, they had a ceremony called the Keeping of the Souls, and it was after one definitive battle. It might have been Wounded Knee. They weren't able to do the Keeping of the Souls. It became an illegal practice. And if my memory serves me, it was a white buffalo woman who told the tribe, that is the spirit of the tribe, is to do the Keeping of the Souls. This tribe can survive many atrocities, but not the loss of the Keeping of the Souls. And so that always stuck with me, and maybe this is just an allegorical leap that I'm making, but when I hear you mentioning that we on this planet have gone through colonization, but it may not even be in our cellular memory to have decolonization, and that before the indigenous were colonized, they had these beautiful ceremonies. But now these new ceremonies have to be created. And it's incredible to see that you, as well as the amazing people that you have around you, have realized that these new ceremonies need to be created because nobody's done it before. It, to me, almost makes me feel that that is the birth of a new tribe. Like the white buffalo woman said, the spirit of our tribe can't exist without this ceremony. And for me, I feel like the newness that's supposed to come of what all this chaos, maybe chaos isn't even the right word, but what all this, these unfoldings that's happening in the world, this crisis period, it almost seems as we need these ceremonies in order for the new to even be born in that way, to have that spirit. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to go even deeper because, there's lots of people out there talking about reconciliation and, wanting the government to reconcile with the indigenous people and that kind of stuff. And frankly, that's never going to happen, because proper reconciliation requires that that we do our own individual healing, reestablish our tribes, and reestablish our proper standing on Mother Earth as co-stewards, and demonstrate through action over a period of time that yes, we have done our healing and we are walking the path in order to rebuild the trust, so that we can then approach the red tribes and even the black tribes or yellow tribes, and then approach them and have a reconciliation ceremony. But it has to be done, in my view, in good standing. It's absolutely insane to contemplate reconciliation when we haven't even gone through our healing process. And how can we do that if we're still colonized and participating in a colonial system? And so for me, acknowledging the violence of that system and how dependent I was on it, and acknowledging that in order for me to be independent, in order to then work on building interdependent relationships or tribe, required that I no longer be dependent, but learn how to look after myself and provide for myself and my family. And that's part of the healing process. And I think that's why I was acknowledged with the spirit name and the feathers, because I was walking the path. My friend Sweetgrass Sitting Bear even told me that, in some ways I make a better Indian than he was. And even though I'm sure he meant that as a compliment, it brought great sadness to hear him say that. And so for me, acknowledging that I'm part of the land, and I'm responsible to replenish the earth and to bring healing and hold that space. I couldn't do that within the construct of a colonial system. It's just, in my view, it's just not possible to do that, because it's just contradicted. It's contradictory and not conducive to healing, because they're so very, very different. Colonial system is all about ownership and control and feudalism and wealth and material, and this tribal way of life is about peace and prosperity and respect and honor, and acknowledging the spirit of every single living being, whether it's the water, the air, the moss, the trees, whatever. One of the teachings that Sweetgrass Sitting Bear taught me is, I'm not to take from my mother, which means I have to change my relationship and ask to see if there's a spirit out there willing to sacrifice itself in order to nourish or heal me. And if there is, then I can offer tobacco or make a trade, but I should never be taking, but rather trading and asking for permission, because as I wrote in my book, I believe that all those spiritual beings are here to serve us, and it's up to us to honor them by asking them when they're ready, and they will offer themselves, and we have to honor that and honor their spirit and their medicine. And that's just not a colonial way of thinking. And so part of this decolonization process is to immerse people in the way of life out here with the trees and the animals, and start making that and introducing that type of relationship and that way of thinking. That's part of the decolonization ceremony.
Yeah. Man, it's incredible how deeply removed we are from where we've come from, how little it seems that we remember. I mean, even I'm just talking biologically, not just intellectually, but how little we remember our connection with nature. We can't handle cold. We can't handle heat. We can't handle certain extremes that was only a part of our, everyday life not too long ago. And in the blink of an eye, there's a lot of forgetting that's been happening. And you sent me an email because yesterday was my wife's birthday. And you sent a video. I'm sorry, what tribe was that?
Video was named Northern Cree.
Northern Cree.
I think it's an actual group, drumming group that made that song.
Yeah. So we were talking yesterday, and I tried to get Barbara over so she could watch it because you wanted to see her face. So I wanted to describe to you her face yesterday. It was pure amazement at first, a lot of love, a lot of just also being impressed with the vocals, just the beauty of the vocals and how into it they all were. And then that faded, and she started to get a little sad, and she started tearing up, and she said, I hate to say it, I almost don't want to say it. And I said, what? Just tell me. And she said, look at all of them. They have so much beauty in their hearts, and they're all they look sick. They look diabetic. They look malnourished. They look like they haven't been taken care of. And they haven't been taking care of themselves. And she obviously knows why. She understands the depth of what happened to these nations, but it made her sad. And her telling me that made me think of what happens on a battlefield when you look to your left and your right, and one of your brothers or sisters in this proverbial battlefield is wounded, and you have to carry them, because maybe there's a chance. And I almost feel like what I heard coming from you when you said you got sad, that Sweetgrass Sitting Bear told you that you make a better native than he does. Maybe that's how I can relate to that sadness, is this feeling that a lot of real trauma, not just local or trending woke status, sadness over like trauma and things along those, what we attribute trauma to, somebody not saying something correctly to us, as a difference to our entire group, but our entire way of life and the memory of who we were, the language, all the customs, the songs, the dance, demolished. And I'm not even sure there's a question that's emerging now. I just wanted to bring that up. That's how she responded to that. She thought it was very beautiful. It was very touching for her there. She found out yesterday that her father only has a couple days to live. And so it's a mixed bag of emotions. And I don't know. I guess, maybe I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you're doing, for the humility and just even the straightforward way that you communicate about what you've had to go through. Ladies and gentlemen, this individual, I've been speaking with White Walking Feather for quite a few years now, over a decade, and really getting to know the ins and outs of this journey. And every step of the way, there's been no spiritual bypassing whatsoever. And it is interesting that in today's day and age, we're getting a lot of spiritual bypassing based upon maybe misattributed or false hope given to us through social media predominantly. And, I guess as we approach whatever nexus point this is for society, I would love to hear from you, Rob. What do you think are the core spiritual bypasses that people are using now so they don't feel the responsibility to step into their power?
One of the common things that I've seen is this idea that, you know, we can just relax and trust the plan, or, you know, light has won, and, you know, things are going to get better, and that kind of stuff, and you know, just watch the dominoes fall. And while I acknowledge the what's the word I'm thinking of here? The commitment, I guess, would be the word. What I sense though is people continuing to live their life the way it is, and in the hopes that, you know, we'll go back to normal. And for me, that's, you know, that normal that they're talking about is still a colonial war battlefield, and doesn't actually help facilitate the level of healing and reconciliation and decolonization that, you know, I've been working on or experiencing for a number of years now. And to me, this still, like, the biggest thing that comes up for me is, you know, even though, you know, people are talking about revolution or, you know, fighting the system or that kind of stuff, my question, I keep asking the question, what's the root cause? What's the root causes? Are we addressing the root causes? And in my view, the root causes are the healing and the shadow work and the integration, so that we can explore who we are and, you know, find that physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual balance within ourselves, and the expression of our relationship with ourselves, so that we can then express that with others in our life. And you know, and I've even had people, you know, especially in the healing process, you know, the world is a mirror, and so we can take a look at the mirror and use that to help us reflect on what's going on inside of us. And to a degree, they're right. But the world also reflects everyone else too, and I can see that as well. So this is more than just a reflection on me, but it's also a reflection on all of us. And so for me, standing as a witness and testifying to what I see is what I can do to help people see things that they may not necessarily see, so that they can explore those shadows and integrate them, and find balance and acceptance within that, so that we can then start exploring the relationships that we currently engage in, and start seeing them as for what they are, rather than what we want them to be or think that they are. I know when I, you know, like I said earlier, you know, when I first found out that the government actually isn't there to help and protect me, and, you know, started seeing the relationship for what it really was, that was very traumatic and stressful and disturbing, and, you know, I was angry and frustrated, and, you know, there's a lot of feelings behind that. And, you know, in some ways I'm grateful for what's unfolding, because that helps people see that in a much more sinister, dark, and disturbing way. And, you know, I don't want to diminish all the people that are dying and and injured and, you know, losing their jobs and all that kind of stuff. If anything, that should put more urgency and focus on doing this work so that we can heal this and remedy it rather than trying to fight it or destroy it. So, um, you know, so for me, this isn't about sitting there and waiting for a savior. This is about stepping up and doing the work. And, you know, through my healing, I acknowledge that, you know, I can't change anybody else, but I can change myself. And so I focus on changing me and walking my path and sharing my story and sharing how I see things, in the hopes that I can influence others. But me going out and trying to force people or, you know, that kind of stuff, that doesn't resonate. Because there's still this thing called free will. And free will requires that I take action. I do the work. I walk the path that I feel I need to walk, and trust that others are going to do the same, and have faith that spirit is going to orchestrate this. But, you know, like a friend of mine told me years ago, I can't just lay out in the field and, you know, ask God to build me a house around me. It's not going to happen. I'm going to get off my butt and do it myself.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, I think the savior complex is a really big one going on right now within terms of spiritual bypassing, whether it's QAnon or, you know, extraterrestrial movement or, you know, the government. There's all these big movements. And, you know, I'm kind of in the camp at times where I'll have to catch myself and always remind myself, you know, if you do believe in the extraterrestrial phenomenon, that the more work we do, the more we can make, you know, contact with more advanced beings. But it is always about doing the work, you know, and if you can't wait on somebody to do the work for you, I think when it really comes down to brass tacks, a lot of times what I see is people don't want to do the work. They just don't want to do the shadow work because it's hard, it's uncomfortable. It's going to make them accept certain truths about themselves that they maybe wanted to compartmentalize or just be in sheer denial about. And that's tough. That you know, this is when it's needed now more than ever. But for a lot of people, I've also learned to accept, like, to hold space and love them, even if they end up going this whole life never wanting to really do the work. That's part of it too. But for those people who are doing the work, I do think you're seeing this shared resonance. They're finding one another. And I think those communities can form decentralized networks physically and online to create strength in numbers, because essentially this is a systemic problem, as you're pointing to, and has deep roots going back to sort of our almost origin points when we went from sort of hunter-gatherers to sort of agrarian culture. But we can create new systems that are in a lot of ways based in the ideals you're putting forth, and I've seen them in many people's concepts, whether it's Zeitgeist Movement, Ubuntu, Intelliger, the Venus Project. A lot of them are saying these shared core principles are key to this systemic design, you know, cooperation and love. These new systems have to be rooted in these new understandings of our connection to nature. But for that first to occur, we have to have the purging, we have to puke, we have to poop a little, we have to really deal with some negative, ugly shit, literally and metaphorically. But the other side is what can incentivize us to do the work. You know, I studied economics in college and have kind of made a big journey out of it. But something that's still very true to this day is people respond to incentives, negative or positive. So what's going to incentivize you to do the work? That's maybe different for everyone else. Maybe it's something positive or something negative, but whatever's going to make you do the work, at the end of the day, that's what's critical. And, you know, that's what, well, with Paul Chek, he's very blunt about it. He's a no bullshit guy. And that's what a lot of times the first thing that everyone who come to him and other holistic practitioners say is, stop bullshitting yourself. Where are you bullshitting yourself? Have love about it. Be unconditionally loving. Still say it's all good. You're human. You know, that's unconditional love. It's love without condition. But be brutally honest. Like, where are you being bullshitting yourself with your ego? What did you buy into? It's all good. But let's work on slowly dissolving that and creating new pathways in the brain and in the soul, so to speak. but yeah, I mean, that's really, I think where the rubber hits the road for a lot of people is, are you willing to do the work? If not, then okay, accept that. But some people say they're doing the work, but they're not. Sometimes I'll say it and I don't realize, like, oh, I'm not doing the work there as much as I should, So it's this deep honesty that I think is really needed on a lot of levels. But that honesty comes with a lot. That's kind of just my 2 cents. However you guys want to run with that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something quick in there that my inner work is also reflected back to me via the teachers and the people I allow to be around me. So my children really show me, they mirror how am I actually doing the work, or have I just gone through an easy patch? Right. And think, oh, I feel great. I must feel great because I'm doing a great job. And, that's great. It really is beautiful to have those moments where things are flowing. But what I also have noticed was, let's just say, this thing that's going on with Barbara today, I don't want to really like air out too much of what's going on with her, but she spoke with her father. I got to speak with him briefly, and she was crying very heavily on the couch, and I was sitting there. I've gotten to the point where like I have enough of a knowledge when I should not even attempt doing any work, just like be there and be around and be present. And so I was, and I saw all of my stuff coming up, because as I was hugging her, and she just said, I don't think I'm ever going to see him again, because we're seeing if there's a possibility as we're going through immigration to get her to Holland to hug her father one last time. I couldn't do anything, and I'm a fixer. I'm sitting there hearing the love of my life crying, and I can't fix it. And the most I can do is just hold her like the best archetypical father would hold a daughter in those moments, so she could feel her father there. And it's really difficult. And I almost connect back to what you were saying, White Walking Feather, about the sadness that you felt when Sweetgrass Sitting Bear had made that comment to you, but also just the conversation we had about grieving, like actually allowing ourselves to grieve what is being lost right now, what is passing. And I guess maybe that's where we should wrap. Is I would love to hear anything that you wanted to mention based upon what Gordon was saying earlier, but also the power and the importance of grieving for the transformation that's happening, and understanding that it's happening, and there will be residue, and there will be things that we have to address, whether we try and become the ostrich and hide our heads in the sands. There will be this outcry. Yeah, what say you to that?
I know people often talk about comfort zone. And I prefer to call it familiarity zone, because most of us are not comfortable, but it's familiar.
Yeah.
And it's actually more scary to step outside what's not familiar than it is to deal with the discomfort. And so what I'm witnessing now is that things are starting to get more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's going to get even more uncomfortable as time progresses, to a point where it will be more painful to stay in that zone than it would be to explore what's not familiar. And what I talk about and learn from, Sweetgrass Sitting Bear and others is not familiar. This is something that goes against the very narrative of the colonial system. But for me, over the years, I've worked hard to expand my familiarity zone so that it's so large that it doesn't matter what I do, I at least have some familiarity with it. And, whether that's through my martial arts training or, challenging my relationship with the crown or living off grid or, building my own structures or that kind of stuff. But even now, my healing isn't done either. And this isn't something where, we heal up and then we're good to do this work. It's kind of doing it all as we go kind of thing. Because, I just finished a circle with my tribe here because I'm still struggling with feelings of abandonment. And, those are feelings that I've struggled with my whole entire life that I still haven't been able to heal and reconcile yet. But I'm working on it. I acknowledge it, and I'm finding more awareness, and I'm around people willing to navigate that with me, which is very special and sacred. And that's what tribe is all about, and I'm humbled by it. And I actually pray that they're listening to this podcast to hear that. If not, I'll share that with them directly. But for me, that's what this is all about. And this is, this life here is about relationships. It's not about anything else. It's all about relationships. And the changes that are going to unfold, there's profound loss. There's going to be a lot of grieving. Just like Barbara is dealing with her dad. The relationships are changing. The division causes great rifts in families and friends, and if we don't hold space and ceremony to help people navigate the grieving, then people are just going to end up stuffing it, and then that's going to be a problem, because later on people are just going to start blowing up and out of frustration and anger and fear, and that makes everything 10 times worse. And so I hold circles every week, Sacred Heart circles every Saturday night, just to provide space for people to talk and to process and to be vulnerable and to share, so that we're not holding on to it and stuffing it, but instead really consciously working through and healing and allowing that energy to flow rather than stagnate or get stuffed, because our bodies are designed to move energy, not stuff energy. And grief and fear and all of these other feelings is just a flow of energy, and that's the whole point of these circles, is to allow that to happen, which requires vulnerability and the capacity to be able to put words and feelings into words and navigate this in a healthy way. And I see circles happening, but I don't see, like within my school for the Pacem Arts, the Sacred Heart Circle is the core of the school. You don't go anywhere learning the art of peace unless we're in circle doing this work, because everything else is founded on it. Like, this is the core of all of this work. And if I see people suggesting new forms of government and all that kind of stuff, but I don't see this as a core, I don't even entertain it at all. So that's what I see unfolding, and in my view, that's that's how we're going to be able to navigate this, because there's going to be a lot of feelings coming up. There is a lot of feelings coming up, and we need a healthy way of processing and healing and integrating that. Otherwise, it's going to cause more problems.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you for sharing that, Smoke, too. That was very fitting. Yeah, you've really deeply impacted a lot of people that I know, even in my life. Myself being the deepest. Man, it's always so deep and heartfelt when we have a conversation, and I was lucky enough to be a part of one of the weekend circles that you have. And actually, even on the chats over here, Richard Ibsen says, "I'm extremely grateful to know White Walking Feather personally. You changed my life, brother. Peace and love always." It really goes deep to the heart of the matter when you're mentioning that any of the solutions that people are speaking about, bringing into the world new forms of governance, new and better ways of doing things. Without that core spark, I really feel it's going to go the way that, at least to date, trying to recreate life has gone. It's always just missing some core spark that we haven't come to understand the mechanisms of. And bringing people back to the heart is really back to that center. That's the litmus test, or the barometer, or the compass for us to really understand, is what we're doing truly not just in alignment with what we would say it's in alignment with me, but in alignment with, let's say, the Tao, that thing that is much larger than us, that thing that is moving. So I would just have to say, I can't stress enough how much I appreciate the work that you've done. And I just want to make sure that the listeners get the opportunity to connect with you. And on your lower third, it says the Pacem Arts. I would love to hear just a little bit more about why you chose to name it that, and how people can connect with you if they want to move deeper in what and I know all the listeners must feel is the right way to move into whatever the next step of this collective evolution is going to be.
Well, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but I trained in the martial arts for over a decade. I hold a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo. And when I acknowledge the true nature of the colonial system, its nature is war. They talk about peace, but there's actually 2 different definitions of peace. One is order, and one is tranquility. So they want order, but I'm actually looking for tranquility. And so the word martial is actually Latin for war, so the art of war. And so I thought, well, if I want to explore peace, because when I made my declaration back in 2008, I declared peace. So I want to be a practitioner of the art of peace. And so the Latin word for peace is pacem. And so, ironically enough, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of web pages for martial arts, but there was none for the Pacem Arts. So I thought that's a testimony of what's actually going on. So I started a school for the art of peace, and it's based on my book. Yeah, it's Graduating Life with Honors. It's a book I wrote after Ungrip came out, and explores this concept that we talked about in Ungrip, that I work hard to live my life by, make mistakes. I've got challenges. I have shadows still, but doing what I can to walk that path. And I want to write a follow-up book. I'm actually calling it Ungrip, a Sacred Transformation, and because the book talks about, graduating life with honors talks a lot about the why and the who, but the next book I'm working on is the how. How do we do it? And so that's part of that process. And it's an art form just like anything else, and it's one that I felt we need now more than ever. So when I went into ceremony about 2.5 years ago, Spirit asked me to do that, and so that's what I've done. And this is a culmination of a lot of help from other people to help me get it to that point. It's been challenging, but I'm persistent, if anything, and I believe I'm making a difference by helping hold space for people to explore this concept and this idea to help them navigate it.
Yeah, you are. You are absolutely. I've gotten such a really good response in the chats. So many people are saying how this went a lot deeper than they expected. To be perfectly honest, we didn't even know we were doing this podcast until yesterday. We just happened to do a weekly chat that we sparked up again. It's been such an honor to know you all these years. It's been an honor to go through all the ups and all the downs, and to see you on your journey, to see how you've learned, to realize that it's incredible because when we first met, I also see in you now the spark that was alive then, and there's something in there that has not changed. And then there's obviously a lot that has matured and developed and grown. A moment of levity would be saying, man, I love your beard. I love the way that it seriously, the way that it's brought out character and tells a story. It not to sound weird, but like the thought of Ungrip 2, the film 2, has been there for quite some time. But it's strange when you see just a not even a physiological shift, just the change in a lot of things that have happened with you on your journey, not just regarding the beard, but the growing up and the change that's happened. And also I remember back to Ungrip 1, there was that moment when we were in front of the Earthship, there was snow on the ground, and you said that, you had seen years prior that there was going to be grid failures, there was going to be crisis, there was going to be a lot of these things that maybe we thought it was going to happen a few years sooner, but it's actually started coming to pass. And what's so amazing about this is I can see that there's also a journey underneath the surface that has really been evolving, and I really do feel like maybe some of your greatest work is still yet to come out, and I think maybe we should rekindle some talks about collaborating on some work together.
Yeah, sorry, seeing Carrie kind of brought up some feelings because Carrie and I separated 2 years ago now. So I've been on a journey for the last 2 years. The name White Walking Feather, the word walking is a medicine of healing. And so I've been on a walking ceremony for the last 2 years, and I've now connected with the land here in Northern Ontario with a small tribe here, Where spirit takes me, I don't know, but now I believe it's going to be here. There's a lot of work here to do. I would love to collaborate for a second film. I actually ran into a few people here at the last ceremony that has the equipment, and I was actually going to talk to you about whether you still wanted to do it or not. I'm actually open to the idea, because I think there's a lot we can say to help people navigate what's going on right now. And yeah, my learning over the last 2 years has been really, really steep, because it's been all about letting go of attachment. Because I was attached to the land in Alberta. I was attached to the work that I did there, and relationships, you know, with my obviously with my family and that sort of thing. But part of this is help teach me to love without attachment and without claiming, you know, ownership and acquisition of wealth and all that kind of stuff. I'm literally traveling with like the clothes on my back and a few tools, and that's it. And trusting that spirit will guide me and protect me and provide for me, and spirit has through beautiful, beautiful people. And that's been part of the teachings and the learnings that I've done over the last few years. So yeah, a lot's changed since the first ungrip. That was over 10 years ago, so that's a lot of time.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the world. So I know it's kind of hard to rein in and to distill it down, but if there's one last piece of advice that you would like to leave the audience with, or maybe just some words to consider, what comes up for you?
I love you. I acknowledge what's going on. I acknowledge the pain and the fear and frustration and, you know, the narrative and all that kind of stuff. I can't fix it for anyone, and I wouldn't even pretend to try. But I do know that my gifts of holding space and sharing my path and being vulnerable and exploring intimacy at a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual level, and holding space for that can help. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to teach people how to do that so that they can then go to their home fires and teach people, and they can then go to their home fires and teach people. I acknowledge I'm just one man, but I know I'm making a difference, and together we can make a difference, and together we are making a difference. I just trust spirit will orchestrate it, and that's all I can really do. And so I love you, and my gift is this, and my gift is to help people explore what these relationships are all about. And so I'm doing my best to use the art forms that are available to me to be able to do that. And from your encouragement, Ben, yesterday, and from a few other people that have been telling me this for months now. I'm gonna do a live video cast, probably through Facebook to start with, but I'll find a way to do it through my website later on. But where we can talk about stuff like this and interact, and people then can catch up on it later. But my art form is writing. I love to write, and I love to teach, hold classes, and that kind of stuff. So that's what we do through the website. So it's there. It's just up to people to connect with me if they want to. If not, no big deal. Either way, I accept what spirit is unfolding, and I have no attachment to the outcomes. I'm just doing what I can to express myself and to stand up and testify to what I'm witnessing, and that's all I can do. And I just appreciate the opportunity here to do that with the two of you. And I thank you, Ben. I have great honor and respect and love for you, and appreciate the opportunity to share once more on your platform. And I thank you for that, and I love you.
Yeah, I love you too. From the bottom of my heart, man. I know I do a lot on camera, but I'm actually I've developed quite a hermit lifestyle, quite an introverted lifestyle, and I don't really find myself reaching out to many people, especially when there's something deep within me that that I'm working on. And what seems to happen when you and I go through these periods where we don't talk for a while and then all of a sudden we do again, I notice there's this movement on this deep underwater channel, or current that that seems to be quite important for me. And I understand that even in the chat over here, people said yes, please ungrip too. I think it's also about time, because I feel like what's happening in the world now is, as it's changing, people are waking up to the externalizations of it all and the projections of it all and the externalities, and still missing the inner work and being sensitive to the inner changes, and even understanding what listening in these time periods is, what it even looks like. So I feel like it's high time for us to bring the medicine back to the audiovisual art. With that being said, I love you so much. I really do. I respect you. I've learned from you in such a profound way that it will never leave me. So I want you to know that. I want the world to understand that, for anybody who follows me and what I do, please understand this is the deepest mentor that I have had in life. And the undercurrent behind all the current affairs or mythological topics or whatever it is that I get into is driven or is connected by this this thread that I've learned in very large part through you. With that being said, I do this Gordo and I, we do this every Thursday. 5 p.m. Eastern, we are live, and we try to bring on people who we could have very deep conversation with. And I just have to say, this has been one of the deeper, more heartfelt, intimate conversations that we've had on this podcast. So thank you for you, and thank you for everything that you are.
Thanks, Ben. And one of my superpowers is to help people really dive deep and really connect to the really dark, scary shit. And I've been there, done that. And so if you need somebody to call you on your shit,
I do.
it's a superpower.
It
Can't help
is. Who's got two thumbs and connects people with their shadow. I love it, man. With that being said, I feel this is a beautiful natural termination of the conversation. Let's bring it to a close. Let's offer its closing like in ceremony, and just give thanks not just to us three here, but also to anything and everything that has made it possible for this conversation to be had. The very time period we're in, the very technology that we're using, the very earth that has given all the elements that all of this has been able to build itself out of, the emerging situation on planet Earth that leads people to realizing that deep healing does need to happen and that now is the time. The sacred and divine feminine that for quite some time has been not only misunderstood, but violated and abused. The same goes for the sacred masculine. The same goes for the children and all the future generations. May we remember that we do have the agency, that it is well within our hearts and our hands, and that the time is now. There is no excuse, but there is no shaming on anything that has not happened up until now. Let's call forth what needs to be called forth in order for what's meant to happen in the most beautiful, poetic way, that it actually comes to pass and we don't just talk about it any further, that we can all feel the truth of this message and why it is so relevant here and now. I have the greatest and utmost respect for everybody who comes to this podcast, who has been following my work, who has been following my good dear friend Rob and the Pagé family. I want to honor Gordon. I want to honor all the people that have helped me get to where I am at, because I am nothing without all of my relationships and without all of you. And with that, I love you all. I have the deepest respect for you, and we will not be here next week for the holiday season, but we wanted to end. We will be back for the 30th, but we wanted to go on this little hiatus with a beautiful message from a very beautiful soul, and we've done that. So with that, in closing of that prayer for all that we are and all that is happening and all that we can bring to bear, I want to say thank you to all of you, and I'll catch you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.